should we observe the Sabbath? Robert Weber is one of the most honest people when it comes to the Sabbath, I think. He is now deceased, but he was an American Christian theologian, and he said it exactly right. Christians changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday because those, especially, I'm going to say, post-Second Temple, but really on through the 2nd century, a lot of the, I would call it, Christian elites that were highly influenced by Rome wanted to separate themselves from the Jews, who were the seventh-day keepers, and so they wanted to differentiate themselves. And there was a number of reasons they wanted to do that, but I'll just leave it at that for now. But it was not a biblically prescribed thing. Now, I don't want to throw them under the bus either. You got to remember that even the Apostle Paul's letters are still circulating at this time, and so they are trying to figure it out themselves, so a lot of tradition takes root. But in the biblical narrative itself, in Paul's letters, there is no indication that the Sabbath was changed from the 7th day to the 1st day, unless you do eisegesis, and then you can read that into the text, and I'll cover that in just a moment. First, here's Robert Weber's quote, because he's a pretty smart guy, and he calls it like he sees it, and I think he's exactly right. So he says, why do most Christians worship on Sunday and not Saturday? 2 reasons. First, it is the day of the resurrection. Second, it is the day of recreation. The resurrection signals a new beginning, a new creation, a new start. For this reason, ancient Christians called Sunday the 8th day, which I totally get. It's not in the Bible. It's something that emerged out of church fathers' patristics, but not out of the Bible itself. So now I want to do is go over this. I have one video that I'm referring to, but I'm not going to link it or anything, because I'm not here to make anyone's day bad or, one up anybody. But eisegesis is happening. But to be clear, if someone were to ask me, should I do Sabbath from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, I would say yes. Yes, you should. In the same way you should actually not commit adultery, in the same way you should actually not lie or not murder. It's not just a heart thing, but it's also a do thing. And, there is always forgiveness. I mean, Yahweh understands that you're not perfect, but at the same time, I'm a teacher. And if I'm going to teach you, I'm going to teach you the right way to do something. If you fail from time to time, it's not a guilt thing, it just is. So anyway, let me cover some of the same texts that this other gentleman covered. Now, the first one is out of Acts chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. It's one of those classic texts. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began teaching them, intending to leave the next day, and he prolonged his message until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. So this is a proof text that Christians say, well, look, sure enough, they're worshiping on the first day of the week. Well, eisegesis is happening. If you notice in second half of verse 7, it says that he prolonged his message to midnight, and there were many lamps in the room. The Hebrew reckoning of time is different than you and me. I grew up with this tendency of going midnight to midnight. That was a day. But in a Hebrew mind, it wasn't like that. In a Hebrew mind, when did the day start? There was evening, and then there was morning, the first day, the second day. But it always starts in the evening. When the sun goes down is when the Hebrew day starts. And so in the Hebrew mind, Paul was teaching on the Sabbath, on the 7th day. The sun went down, but he continued to teach. Now, they didn't have TV and stuff. And so they would stay gathered, and they would have a supper, and the lamps in verse 8 are an indicator that they were having this supper together, they're communing. In Hebrew, it's called Malava Malka, and it's just a Hebrew Jewish get-together. Now, I'm going to say Hebrew Jewish, but you got to remember these early Christians in Acts 2, they're doing this exactly like this. They're a sect of Judaism, and they are Sabbathing, and there they are at night. And so Paul stays up, and so here they are till midnight. And so when sun went down on that, for us, Saturday night, that would be the first day of the week. That's why they describe it that way. So that's that one. Next is Romans 14. Verses 5 and 6. One person regards one day above another regards every day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. He must observe the day, observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord, so on and so forth. Now, in Romans 14, the issue is Gentiles who are in very pagan areas, and there's a lot of temples that they worship a lot of different sorts of gods. Artemis is a big one. And they would have pagan festivals, and they would have meats that were sacrificed to these idols. And so even though the meat itself might have been kosher according to the Torah, because it was sacrificed to an idol, some people's conscience says, no, I'm not going to eat that because I really want to stay close to Yahweh. And some people said, well, it's okay for us to do that. And Paul's saying, be convinced in your own conscience. The same thing was happening with regard to the festival days. And when I mean festival days, it would be the pagan, usually Greek-oriented festival day. And so the Apostle Paul is saying that, some of you have this, conscience in you that you really don't want to do business with pagans when they're celebrating Artemis or whatever. And they're engaging in revelry and all that. And you don't want to participate in that. But some of you, for whatever reason, have an okay conscience. And so it's like the Bible doesn't necessarily say anything directly to that, but Paul's just saying, hey, you need to be convinced in your own conscience. That's what Romans 14 is actually about. And so it's eisegesis to read into it that somehow one person can call Yahweh's Sabbath the seventh day, another person can call it the second day or a third day. No, it's always on the seventh day. That doesn't change. That's not what even this text is about. Just go do your research. That's what you're going to find. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that no collections be made when I come. So, the Apostle Paul is going to come, take a collection, but he doesn't want to do it on the Sabbath. Usually Paul is going to be with them on the Sabbath, but, in the Jewish culture, it was unsavory, not cool to do like money things on the Sabbath. And so the Apostle Paul is saying, first of all, by the way, we worship Yahweh every day of the week, but to their sensibilities, Paul's saying on the first day of the week, don't do this stuff on the Sabbath, on the seventh day. On the first day of the week, that's when you do that kind of stuff. Put away your money, save it, an offering to the Lord, and then I will get it, and then I will take it. That's it. That's all that's going on there. We can't look at the corpus of all the Old Testament and somehow read something like this and all this. Well, there you go. This is why we have the Sabbath. We change it to the first day of the week. No, we can't proof text like that. That is not responsible exegesis. We shouldn't do that. So that's what's going on there. Now, in Galatians chapter 4, verse 10, it says there, you observe days and months and seasons and years. And basically in context, the Apostle Paul is coming down on people for what he calls, I'll read verse 9. But now that you have come to be known by God, to know God, or rather to be known by God, how is it that you turn back again to the weak and worthless elemental things, which you desire to be enslaved all over again? So again, look, every nation, every people group had their special days. The Israelites had theirs, and those were the right ones. They were the ones that Yahweh prescribed, but other countries prescribed their holy days as well. And the Apostle Paul says to these people who are engaged in holy days that are not Yahweh's holy days, they are, Greek holy days, of some sort. And he says, you observe days and months and seasons and years. Now, here's the catch thing on this. I'm going to put a quote below and a link below, but it is from Mark Nanos, who is he's a Christian but Jewish scholar, and I've really valued his writings. But on this, and I'll put, you can read it below, but he says, if this were the Apostle Paul talking about distinctly Jewish things, what Yahweh had given the people at Sinai, he would have put in the word weeks. Because in the way that they did their holy days, that's how they would have referenced it. They had the weekly Sabbath, but then they had the Feast of Weeks, and both of those would count as weeks. The foreign country people didn't have weeks. Now, you're like, well, isn't that just kind of a technicality? Let me tell you something. If I were to say that something happened on December 24th, I don't think anyone would think, oh yeah, that's Christmas. No, they wouldn't. They would know that's Christmas Eve, period. December 25th has the connotation or objective, whatever that is, to Christmas. I mean, we just culturally know that's what that is. If I were to say July 2nd, well, that's pretty close to July 4th, but is it July 4th? It's not. It's just not the same. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's July 4th and that it's December 25th. The same is true with how Paul would have phrased the holy days. He would have put in the word weeks had he been referring to a Jewish Yahwehist celebration. So that's what's going on there. Now, you go research on your own, but that's just what I see. The last one is Revelation 1, verses 10 and 11. John, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Some people take that as a justification that now, yes, this is the eighth day. This is when Yeshua, Jesus, raises from the dead. And there you go. No. The Lord's day, if you just get out your concordance, do like a simple search, and if you put on there the day of the Lord, and I looked at the different Greek constructions, I don't know why they didn't write here. They very easily could have. I was in the Spirit on the day of the Lord. That's different. Not different. It's the same thing. It's just constructed differently here. But the day of the Lord is the day where Yeshua will return in power and glory and initiate a millennial kingdom. And there's going to be some rough stuff that happens, tribulation and such. But that's what's in reference here. It's not talking about this, Christian Sabbath. All we're doing is eisegesis. We're reading into the text. So I'm going to put a link to my classroom video. That's my favorite one. This one was when I do this type of video, if I'm just going through text, there's like not emotion. It doesn't give the feel. One of the things that I really want to do as a moonlight theologian YouTuber is to help you see that what I'm really talking about is about passion and love and romance with our Creator. So many people hear what I say and they equate it to Jewishness and roteness and law. It's not like that. It's anniversary dates with our beloved. It's the way it's it's Yahweh's 5 love languages, and he's showing us this is how I really feel loved by you. That's the spirit of which I tell you this, but I didn't have the time to do that right now. So anyway, that's what I could do on a short week. It is what it is. I'll come back to the Sabbath topic soon. All right, see you next week.